our first Global Communicators Award to her. And if for some reason she gets off the international theme and talks about Abraham Lincoln, Major League Baseball, or dogs, or various authors she's known. But Kathleen, thank you for coming.
Hi.
Hi.
After so many years of talking, now I spend my days talking to dogs. I'm not kidding you. That's who I talk to. I talk to dogs now because that's one of my big areas of retirement. Well, I'm going to kind of ramble here because I want to talk about the UN a little bit and certainly about some of the people who have inspired me and certainly a little bit about why I had to stop talking on the radio because it was just became too hard. So I think of the United Nations, and many of you I've known for so many years, and it's really good to see you and to know that you're continuing wonderful work, helping us understand what's happening in the world. I love the fact that there are so many refugees here tonight, and I hope that once again we'll become a welcoming country, and we will begin to understand the world instead of one person who lives in the world, but more on him later. So when I think of the United Nations, it's interesting because my mind went to things I hadn't thought about for a long time. I think about my grandmother and Adlai Stevenson. And Stevenson was, of course, ambassador to the United Nations from 1961 to 1965, which is when I was in high school. And my grandmother was his campaign chair for Northern Illinois in 1952 and in 1956. So we talked a lot about the United Nations, and we talked about Adlai Stevenson during those dinner visits. The Cold War, of course, was omnipresent in those years, and I paid attention to the Cold War, the possibility of World War III, seriously, and I've talked to other people for whom this was the case, entered my nightmares. I used to dream about World War III once a week, regularly, in the 1950s. I had that recurring dream. And the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, during those years had us all worried that the nightmare was going to become real. And I vividly remember, and you all know this, most of you know this if you're of a certain age, but I vividly remember Stevenson's address, his takedown of the Soviet ambassador in October of 1962. Do you deny that the USSR has placed and is placing immediate and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation. Yes or no? And the Russian ambassador squirmed and said, I am not in an American courtroom, sir. You will have your answer in due course. And of course, the line we remember from Stevenson is, I am prepared to wait for an answer until hell freezes over, if that is your decision. And it's interesting to be reminded of that, because Russia, of course, is now undermining our elections. And as I was thinking this morning, we appear to be waiting until hell freezes over before we do anything about it. And the only bright spot is now a U.S. ambassador who doesn't get confused. Yeah. So I appreciate the UN and all the work that's been done all over the world, and that you highlight the world instead of what's happening here. I had the great good fortune, as Gary said, to talk about the world and talk about important issues for 42 years. 42 years! That's a long time. And actually, that was in Milwaukee. It was several years before that in North Carolina when Watergate was happening. So we were watching the unraveling of the Nixon administration, and lo and behold, when I came to WTMJ, Nixon was gone, and the people I started interviewing early on I was in my 20s, early 25, John Dean and John Ehrlichman and all of the people who I had watched endlessly and listened to endlessly, and figured that I had a part in bringing them down, working for a small station in North Carolina. You know. So there were many political figures, others, interviews with, I figured there were probably over 12,000 interviews over that period of time, so it's hard to remember all those people. Eventually, I'll go and look at files and listen to some old shows because I can't even remember all the people I had the great pleasure to meet. But many were inspirational, people who stay with me and still stay with me, people like Studs Terkel, Wonderful, wonderful historian, lived so much, had so much to share. Maya Angelou, who had, vividly remembered, she was just genuine and poetic, and her words were so beautiful. And she was talking about her grandmother. It was a book she had written about her grandmother, and I tell this story frequently, but we could use more acts of generosity. And a young woman called in who was about to get married, and her grandmother had raised her, and her grandmother had just died. And she was crying because she missed her so and wanted her so much to be at the wedding. And Maya said, can you just stay on the line? I want to talk to you. So we put her on hold until the show was over. And lo and behold, Maya Angelou sent her a present for her wedding. Which I remembered forever. It was just so touching that she did that. It's good to be reminded that there is indeed goodness in the world. I had a chance to interview Adlai Stevenson's son, and got a chance to talk about my grandmother with him. He was delightful. Jane Goodall, that was a treat. Senator McGovern, who was on the show several times, and I know that McGoverns have been active here. And I remember he asked Susan, who was with him, I really would like to have a chocolate milkshake. And she found one somewhere. I have no idea where she found one. But he was
Wendy's.
Was it at Wendy's? Do you know the story? Yeah, it must have been, because I don't know where you get a chocolate milkshake. But he was talking about world food programs and World War II and drinking his chocolate milkshake. He was a wonderful man. John McCain, I had some wonderful interviews with John McCain, where he highlighted people who had served in World War I and World War II and Vietnam, Korean War. Dwight Eisenhower's son, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Madeleine Albright, Frank Zeidler, of course. Many times Frank Zeidler. It's so good to see his daughter here today. He was just a treat, He'd come to the studio, he'd been at Central Library, and he'd have all these books. He didn't drive, so he'd have all these books. He'd taken the bus and loading him down, and I've told this story before. He was on his 80th birthday. It was almost his 80th birthday, or it had just been. And I asked him, "What did you get at the library, Frank?" And he said, so he showed me, and it was all books about what happened to the body during that decade of life. He wanted to be prepared for what was going to happen to him.
Oh wow!
And then I got a chance to moderate his 90th birthday celebration. And I said, those books must have been very valuable for him, because he knew what was to come. The Institute of World Affairs brought the great decision speakers to our studio, and we talked about the world: North Korea, free trade agreements, humanitarian needs, the refugee crisis, which is something that has been so difficult to watch, and it's entered my soul, and I plan to do what little I can about that now. Natural disasters like the Haitian earthquake, the popular uprisings in toppling governments of Tunisia and Egypt, protests in Libya and Yemen, the war in Afghanistan, the Peace Corps, the military-industrial complex, years of programs on terrorism, the future of Al-Qaeda, Brexit, healthcare systems throughout the world, World War II, World War I, the Civil War, US and Russia, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Economic Revolution, the Iran nuclear deal, the world since 1945, and of course, Abraham Lincoln. We did lots of shows on Abraham Lincoln, just because I was doing the show, and I figured he was worth knowing about, and he still is, and that's who I continue to read about now. Election integrity throughout the world, voting rights. There were just so many issues that we brought to attention, and it was with an engaged audience, and thank goodness for public radio, and I'm forever grateful that I had a chance to learn so much and to highlight some of those issues. I also wanted to do some exploration of my own, and so, nobody ever had any faith in me. It was Dick Leonard, another one of, Dick was a great guy. They put me on, when I was first hired at TMJ, a Saturday morning, 7 a.m. talk show on a rock and roll radio station. That had a lot of listeners. Well, it didn't. But I remember the second show I did, Dick Leonard called me after the show and said, "I really like that program." So I had a fan in him early on, and at a time when I thought there was absolutely nobody listening. So that was wonderful. I took a group of listeners to Belfast, Northern Ireland. I just told the station, well, I think we ought to do this, and they just wanted to get rid of me. All right, go ahead and do it. So I come up with all these ideas, and they didn't know what to do with me, so they just say, go ahead and do it. Where we did an amazing broadcast, which I'll always remember, of people from all the political parties except for the IRA, because they were not allowed in the BBC studios. And I just, went to all of these parties, and I said, I was, in my 20s, I said, come on, let's go on, come on the radio, we're going to solve peace in Northern Ireland, and we're all going to talk to each other, it's going to be a good thing. And they showed up with their bodyguards, and they all had guns. And then I realized I was kind of in over my head. But we actually made news, because nobody had done that before, so we were on the BBC. Again, they were just trying to, get rid of us. So reports from China, went to Nicaragua. Adlai Stevenson remembered what he had been told. He remembered that one of the reasons that the astronomers of the world cooperate is the fact that there's no one nation from which the entire sphere of the sky can be seen. And perhaps that's a fact, a parable, he said, for national statesmen whose political horizons are all too often limited by national horizons. And I would add that the same could be true of many who live in America. We need to know what's happening in other parts of the world. We need to have the news be more than, I read somewhere that 90% of television news particularly is devoted to a deeply flawed man who is our president. And the coverage of this man may eclipse that of any single human being ever. Ever. Which is pretty frightening. So, after reading very little, because I read so much during the first months of retirement, and finally decided I had to get out of my pajamas because it was 11:30 in the morning, I now devote myself to issues that are important to me. One is voting, and I've been working with the League of Women Voters. One is dog training, and I do just love dogs. We've been to 29 training classes already, all over the place. He's not there yet, but he's going to be a therapy dog, I think. I really do think he will be. I just love talking to him. I love living with an animal that's fun, and he loves me. He loves me. I love him. It's good. And one which I just started, and I'm so enthusiastic about, Mary Flynn, who's going to be the keynote speaker today, and I'm delighted she brought refugees here today, and I met my family I'll be working with just last Tuesday, and I know it's going to be very important work, so I'm just delighted to have gone through the training program with Mary and hope that some of you will do the same. It's incredibly rewarding, incredibly rewarding. I fully intend to eventually start saying exactly what I think after many years of biting my tongue. And to devote energy to political candidates who are smart and inspirational. I do have faith. The young people have been incredible with these marches. And all the people who are running off for office, I think things will change. They will, won't they? Do you think things will change? Yes. Good. Good. I should have been talking to people more than dogs to get inspiration from you. And I intend to keep marching. I'm doing marches now, and all right. So it's good. So thank you so much for the award. It's really nice. And thanks for all of the work that you've done for so long. Many of you I know are really good people. Thank you.